Hi all, welcome. It's Dr. Devine, the last lecture of 1310, and this is a review session for exam number 3. It looks like we have about 25 students here participating in the live review. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Before we get started, I want to give a few minutes of space here to allow you students to ask any questions that you have about the course or about the housekeeping, the format, any questions not related to the review sheet and the content, but about how we're completing the course and how we're crossing the finish line. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Is there going to be a set time period, like for the exam, just like 3:30 to 4:50, or we can be able to take it all day?
You're going to be able to take it anytime on the 13th of May. So you have a 24-hour period. Actually, the exam will be posted at about 8 or 8:30 in the morning on the 13th, and then you'll have until 11:55 that night to start it. But once you begin, you'll have the exam period time, which is 2 hours or something like that. But that should be plenty of time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
There's a writing portion for this one too, right?
Yes, it's going to be the exact same format as exam number 2. So we have the benefit in this class of already having been through this once, and it's going to be the exact same thing. And I'm going to sneeze. This is why we're not around each other. Hi, Ivana. I felt like I was going to sneeze. Pardon. So yeah, you'll have pretty much 15 multiple choice questions, 15 fill in the blank, true, false, and then you'll have one essay question at the end. I want to ask a couple of you for your advice, actually. I haven't taught an online class before, and there's a lot of concern in my department and across the university about students cheating on exams. And I'm kind of going with the assumption that many people are using their notes during the exams. So I guess my question for you is, should I be explicit with the students taking exam number 3 to say that it's open book, you can use your notes, the PowerPoints and the readings, but insist that you cannot share questions and answers amongst yourself? I need some advice on that. I mean, I feel like it's ridiculous to make people promise they won't use their notes. I don't want to set people up to cheat, right? But I certainly want to avoid group me sharing of answers and that sort of thing, because that's just flat out cheating. Give me some advice. What would you do if you were me?
I think I would allow the notes and lectures. That's what I see other professors are doing, and I think that's a good move. I mean, they're probably going to use it anyway, or we are.
Yeah, and I sort of didn't say anything last time, but people are getting really nervous about the whole academic honesty. And for me, I feel like it's fair for you to use your notes and the PowerPoints on the exam, but I do feel like sharing answers on a GroupMe or something like that would be cheating. And so maybe I'll send does anybody else have thoughts on that? I mean, what I could do is send an email to the group and say, here are the terms. I'm going to let you use your notes and use your PowerPoint materials. Keep in mind, you only have 2 hours to do the exam. It's not like you have 30 minutes to look up every answer, right? There's still a time slot. But I'll have people agree to the academic honesty code that they're not sharing answers among or questions among fellow students. Does that sound good? Yeah?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between like using your resources that you have like for yourself than like just blatantly giving people answers or just cheating off of like other people.
Yeah, I agree completely. Okay, so that's how we're gonna move forward with this exam. And I also feel like, you know, this exam has a lot of information. It's a lot of technical, economic information. And so I want you to have that resource and do the best that you can. But of course, you know, I often hear from fellow students in the class when the honor code has been broken. So I'm going to be pretty strict about folks not sharing answers or, you know, sharing questions. But I'll make it clear that it's free to use your notes, and it'll be an open book exam, okay? All right. The other thing that's important to clarify is that this exam is only going to cover the last 5 lectures. This is not a comprehensive exam. I'm not going to be asking you about Linnaeus's System of Nature or Jared Diamond or the Congo. We are focusing just on the last 5 lectures, the material covered since exam number 2. Is that clear to everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Any other questions that you might have?
I have a question.
Okay.
So I don't know about anybody else, but are tracks for me under assessment? Doesn't I have an exam 1 that's due today?
Good question.
What
Okay.
is that for?
Hey, okay, so what happened was, I'm getting a little feedback here. Let me, I'm just gonna mute you all in the hope that that feedback, sorry about that. So I was just getting some weird feedback. I don't know if you heard it, but you've been muted. Unmute yourself, please, when you want to make a comment. That exam number 1 is a makeup exam for people who missed exam number 1 in class. So if you took the exam number 1 in class, just ignore that. I suppose it would have been more helpful if we made that visible only to the handful of students, but we didn't figure that out. So don't worry about that. If you took exam number 1 in class, you're good to go. We just had to start scheduling the makeup exams at this point for the other students. Thanks for that question. That was a good question. I got that via email. Thanks for that. I was going to mention it.
I have a question too.
So there is no, Marcellus, there is no exam today. Goodness gracious. There's no exam today. Okay, no. Sorry that you saw that and it corresponded with our review, but that is just for people who are going to have to take a makeup exam. Okay. Oh, the other thing that I wanted to mention was that there is an extra credit opportunity to watch Rick Steves' Iran episode. Did anybody see that? Okay, so Mario saw that, a couple of other people. Okay, so I only have 9 submissions for the extra credit. I would encourage you to check that out. In prepping for today, I realized that I didn't upload the PowerPoint presentation for the 1953 Iranian coup. So that is now posted on Tracks. Maybe I'll just show you all where this is. I think that you would really enjoy watching this. And I think that, you know, you would learn a lot about Iran and it would help you prepare for the exam. So you can consider this, you know, maybe something that you would enjoy doing, but also we'll call it work. Sorry about this. I'm going to share my screen with you in just a minute. Okay, so here we go. Let's see if we can make this work. All right, so here's the screen. If you go under Iran and Syria, I have now located as of today, sorry for the delay, that PowerPoint on the Iranian coup. And you'll see, I think I have to do this a little bit differently. Sorry, folks. Make you a little dizzy here. Okay, so in this PowerPoint at the very end, you'll see that I have extra credit due May 9th. So you have another few days. I want you to watch this hour-long special. Here is the link. It's available for free online. And I want you to just write a small paragraph after watching it in its entirety that talks about what you find surprising about Iranian urban and rural landscapes. What do you find interesting about contemporary life and or gender relations in Iran? What other questions or comments about Iran and US-Iranian relations does this video raise for you? Okay, so you have until May 9th. All you have to do is watch the hour-long travel show and write a paragraph. And I can't remember what I said was the incentive. What did I say in the lecture? Does anybody remember? I guess
I think it was 2 points added to exam 2.
Oh, I thought
Yeah,
it
it
was
was 2
exam
points.
3. 2 points for exam 3 or exam 2?
It was for exam 3.
For
Yeah.
exam 3, right? It would make sense. Okay, so you know, that's 2 points out of 50. That's 4 points overall. So that could, you know, that could make a difference with the grade. So I'll go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure that the extra credit was 2 extra credit points out of 50. So you double that for out of 100 for exam number 3. And what you're going to do is you're going to locate those on, let me just take you back to our track site here. Under assignments, you'll see here that I've got 9 submissions as of April 13th when I opened it. So that's where you would just basically upload a Word document where you have written some thoughts. 150 words is not that much, like 5 or 6 sentences. Okay, any questions about the extra credit opportunity for exam 3?
I have a question about grades.
Okay, yes.
When will our course grade be like viewable to us?
It's not, the overall grade is not viewable right now.
No, not like the course grade that gives us if we have an A or a B or a C.
Okay, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Let me view course grade statistics. I will figure that out today. I'm not exactly sure. Here we go. Okay. All right. I have done that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I think
Yes,
I did
and
it.
when will the extra credit from the time we did spend in class, will that be added after like all the tests have been taken and stuff?
Yep. Sarah and I are going to be entering all of that this week, getting all of those loose ends up in terms of the extra credit, your participation grade. So you will have that by Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your patience. It's been a bit tricky keeping up with the workload and also navigating everything else. But I will be sure to get that to you by Friday so that you'll have a couple of days to know where you sit before the exam. Okay, great questions. Other questions?
I had a question about the lecture in tracks. I didn't see anything for Wednesday. Did I miss something?
We did not have a lecture on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yep. We were going to do a COVID lecture, but to be honest, folks, lots of people are struggling out there with mental health and financially, and there was some debate with other professors, and actually a student in our class has COVID. And so I decided to just give everybody a breather and a chance to get caught up with maybe some readings or lectures they hadn't done, and not run the risk of making you study something that's causing you a lot of trauma in your life at this moment. Yeah, so that you're on top of it. There was no lecture on Wednesday of last week. Other questions? Okay, so thank you for those. That was really helpful. And I'll be sure to get all caught up with the grading and the extra credit from the attendance option early on, and make sure that all the grades are synced and ready for you to see by Friday, okay? Any other questions?
For forms, I did it like when I looked at the forms. Every time I was always late because I included stuff on Sunday, and it'll be like things that was already there. So I didn't really participate in the forums, but I was there in class and I did do the participation in class. So how big of an effect will the forums have with the participation grade?
Not a huge impact. And just know that we are going to be giving you as high of grade as possible. So if you're on the fence, we'll bump you up. We'll be looking for any sort of activity or presence online. And you could even still at this point add some things in if you like, but I don't really know if it's going to make that big of a change. So it's
Okay, thank you.
You're not going to get docked.
Okay, great.
For not contributing, okay? These are really good questions. Other people?
Not that it really matters now, but also with the forums. I just don't think I ever understood them. It felt like it was always, it's just people posting a question, but nobody ever responding. I didn't really understand the point to them, I guess.
Well, yeah, the forums did not work as well as I would have liked. I had imagined that it might be a venue for students to communicate with each other. And I also have had a hard time keeping up with forums and posting, but I never envisioned it just as a way for me to communicate. So I agree that I'm a little bit frustrated with my own inability to keep up with forums, but also it didn't become sort of a discussion board as I had hoped. So, you know, it's there, and that's where we got with the forums. So sorry about that. And I certainly, after surviving today and tomorrow is wrapping up this week, I will go and make sure if there's any questions in there that I will answer them. Some people were getting confused and posting review terms, not under the exam review forum, but in the lecture forum. So it was a little bit discombobulated, but I think it was just maybe a little bit too ambitious having to transfer online in the way that we did. Any other questions?
On quiz 5, it would just show like quiz 5 and then my grade, but now it pops up with quiz 5 and like a side note that says retake, and I'm not really sure what that means.
Okay, well, I'm not sure why you would be having that either, except for, you know, we have been trying to accommodate people who missed their exams. So if it's probably only a retake for people who missed the exam or missed the quiz the first time. But if you want to email me, I think that would be a really good option to sort of deal with your particular question. I have the same quiz 5 retake, but I didn't miss it. I'll look into that. Mine shows that too, and I haven't missed any. I also took it. Okay, so you guys took quiz 5 again? Uh-oh.
No, I just did it once, and it never had that retake comment, but now when I look into the gradebook, it has it.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that people are seeing with exam number 1, that rather than that only being visible to the students who need to take it, it's there for everybody. Yeah, you can sort of see. So folks, what I'm saying is that if you have grades and you have already taken these exams, it's not a retake for you, not an exam number one to take again. We're just trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt and let them take past quizzes and exams they've missed.
I also have a question.
Okay.
So for the quizzes, like 1 through I think 4, they got put on like the map quizzes part, and then also 4 was on the uncategorized part with 5. So do you think quiz 5 can be dropped, or is it just like 1 through 3? Because one of my like higher grades of a quiz got dropped rather than like my lower one for quiz 5, if that makes sense. It's kind of hard to explain.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry, when did you all take quiz 5?
Like last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out what's happened, because when I look at the grade book, I'm not seeing a quiz 5 in there.
It's on an uncategorized section with quiz 4.
Huh. Okay. Well, I will reach out to Sarah Moya and figure out what's going on there and send an email out to you. Okay.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was just wondering because it dropped like 100 that I had, but then my quiz 5 was lower, so I was like, oh no, I want that one dropped.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing happened to me. I was just about to ask the same thing.
So I think what's happened somehow, yes, I'll have to figure it out. When the quiz number 5 retake was created, for some reason, that's where I'm seeing all of your grades. Okay, so we'll sort that out and get it sorted by Friday, okay? And apologies for the confusion there. Quiz number 5, okay, uncategorized, okay.
I also had a question concerning the quizzes.
Okay.
For quiz 4 and 5 were both the same amount of questions, but quiz 4 says out of 6 and then quiz 5 says out of 5.
Yes, so they are, it's just an arbitrary number, whether it's out of 6 or 5. Your question is, why do they have different point values?
Yes, if they were both the same question number.
The same number of questions? Well, sometimes with the multiple choice questions, they're weighed a little bit more heavily. But even though the number, even though quiz number 6 is out of 6 points and quiz number 5 is out of 5, they're still weighted the same. Quiz number 4 is not worth more of a percentage of your grade than quiz number 5. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And sorry, folks, we have, it's been quite the challenge going online. And then of course, we have a lot of material in this course, but this is very good for me to make sure that we're sorting out the kinks now. And I'll figure out what's going on with quiz 5. And yeah, I'll ask Sarah and we'll get on top of that, because most certainly that we've got something going on. Yeah, it looks like, I don't know, I'll look into it and we'll get it sorted out. And if there's any question, you'll get the benefit of the doubt if there's a problem, and you'll get full credit, okay? So just don't think that this is gonna negatively impact your grade. All right, what other questions do we have before we get into the material? Yeah, any other questions? I'm sort of catching up with the chat here. What you're going to get, I've actually started working on the exam itself, started writing the exam, and I think you're going to do really, really well. if you be sure to watch all the lectures, and maybe rewatch the lectures as a good way to prepare. And we're going to have a lot of straightforward terms, naming people, and taking questions directly from the lectures and the PowerPoint. And so in terms of your review, what I would do is I would be sure to watch all of the lectures. And what I've done, if you're able to, many of you aren't able to, I've printed out all of the PowerPoints. And since we've decided that we're going to make this exam explicitly open book, you know, I find having these 5 lectures here printed out to be really, really useful. Okay. So, of course, I would love for you to go back to the readings. They were pretty short and focused, but nonetheless, you know, as I'm writing this exam, I am pulling my exam questions primarily from the lectures, the handouts, and the PowerPoints. Okay. Any other questions about housekeeping before we get into the material? I've got sort of a draft exam question that I want to share with you. Okay. Remember that the exam number 3, so this is the point where you want to write down very quickly, because since it's open book, I might as well give you a heads up of where we're going, okay, in terms of preparing your exam question. So the question that I have right now, and this is your sort of open-ended exam question, which will be worth 20 out of 50 points, right? And I'm not promising this is going to be the question, but this is what I'm thinking of, is what is the neoliberal theory of trickle-down economics, right? What is the theory of trickle-down economics? And why does Joseph Stiglitz argue that it is a myth? Okay. And what policies does Stiglitz identify to reduce economic inequality in the United States? Name 3. Do you agree with these policy prescriptions? Why or why not? So maybe, can we start there, folks, reviewing those questions, since I think that's going to be something like that for your essay question. So I need you all to help me. What is the neoliberal theory of trickle-down economics?
Isn't it when we like stop or like reduce taxing on like the wealthy, and then the benefits will like reap down to the lower, like middle and lower classes?
Good. I want to hear, that's exactly right. I want to hear someone else say it in their own words.
It's a theory that cutting taxes on the wealthier class of people will encourage them to spend more money in our economy, and that way the money that we give to them will increase the money that trickles down to us.
Right, very good. Trickle-down economics is the theory that claims that benefits for the wealthy trickle down to everyone else. These benefits are tax cuts on businesses, tax cuts on high-income earners, and reducing state expenditure in welfare programs and social safety nets. So trickle-down economics is a neoliberal economic theory. Okay, it supposes, or it argues, that if you reduce taxes for companies and you reduce taxes for the wealthiest of American citizens, the theory argues that those wealthy companies and those wealthy individuals will reinvest that savings in the economy, and the benefits will trickle down to everyone. Okay, so why does Joseph Stiglitz argue that trickle-down economics is a myth?
Well, basically, those rich people who are getting all the benefits have captured that wealth, and they keep growing wealth on top of that wealth through rent seeking. And I mean, I remember there was a graph that showed that like production has been going up since the 60s, but people's wages have been stagnant since the 70s.
Yes, I have shown that graph a couple of times, but particularly in the us versus them lecture, there are two really powerful graphs. I'm going to see if I can. Let me just. There we are. Okay. There's this graph here. I don't know if you can see it, where this is a graph that illustrates the distribution of wealth of the top 1% of income earners and the bottom 50%. And in the mid-1990s in the United States, the wealth of the top 1% of Americans surpassed the entire wealth of the bottom 50%. So this is also related to this graph here, which is the one that Elle was mentioning, that illustrates that while the US economy has been extremely productive, GDP has been increasing, people's wages have stayed the same. So while national productivity has continued to increase, workers' wages have stayed the same. And that's a reversal of a trend that preceded neoliberalism. Typically in the past, when production increased, it meant that wages also increased. But unfortunately, the myth of trickle-down economics has meant that that wealth that has been accruing at the top has not trickled down. It has not been redistributed. And the whole point here is that Stiglitz, Joseph Stiglitz, is arguing that the gross inequality that characterizes the US economy is the product of neoliberal economic reforms, that trickling down hasn't trickled down, that that wealth has stayed at the very top, rather than truly providing increased wages, living wage jobs, investments in education, investments in healthcare. The wealth has not trickled down. It has remained with that top 1%. Okay, so the next part of that, any questions on that? And it looks like on slide 12 of the presentation on the way forward, Monday's lecture, he says, yes, wealth accumulation at the top has not trickled down. The top 0.001%, this is a myth of trickle down, that the 0.001% deserve their wealth. They are not, and what Stiglitz is saying is that the super wealthy, the top 0.001% in the United States, that they are not the innovators of the economy. They're not unraveling the human genome. They're not making scientific discoveries in telecommunications, processing, mathematics. No, that 0.001% is a class of financiers who make money not by producing and increasing manufacturing or increasing the wealth of society, but they make money through rent seeking, through speculation. Rent seeking is earning wealth without benefiting society. It's basically kind of cheating in a way, in the sense that if you have a monopoly, we talked about rent seeking with the example of, and you will have rent seeking as one of your multiple choice questions here, that rent seeking, an example that we saw early on in the class was actually the source of the oil crisis in the 1970s. Remember, we were studying how we got into this moment of neoliberalism, and neoliberal economic reforms were pushed through the US economy and the world economy following the oil crisis of 73 and 79. And really important for you to remember that while we're focusing on the US and Europe right now, earlier in this class, we focused on structural adjustment policies, right? And how neoliberal reforms came to the so-called third world through the mechanism of debt and the IMF structural adjustment program. So neoliberalism has been something, it's an economic ideology that has produced globalization today as we know it. And a lot of people be angry about it, right? Not everyone is not happy with globalization, but what they're really talking about is that most folks are not happy with how neoliberal globalization has unfolded since the 1970s. And it was the oil crisis of 73 and 79. Somebody remind me about the OPEC oil embargo of 1973. Do you remember this? The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in 1973 did what to get back at Western powers for supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War in 1973? What did the Middle Eastern Arab countries do?
They participated in rent seeking by
In rent seeking. So what is like rent seeking, right? The definition is when an individual or an entity seeks to increase their own wealth without benefiting society. That's a broad definition. Rent seeking by OPEC in 1973, they created a cartel. They got all of the big petroleum, the 8 or 9 big petroleum producers, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, etc., and they got together and they said, we're going to reduce, hey guys, let's work together to reduce the amount of oil that we're putting out there on the global market so it'll drive prices up. And they did that acting as a cartel. They monopolized or have a huge share of the global oil market. So that was an example of rent seeking. They made money off the increased price in oil without contributing or benefiting society. So rent seeking also happens when you have a monopoly, for example, in insurance providers, right? If there's only a handful of insurance providers in the United States or drug manufacturers, they can set the prices wherever they want. That's rent seeking. Rent seeking in the form of the vast inequality that we have today has to do with these derivatives and these financial mechanisms that were created in the 1980s with the deregulation of international finance. Back in the day, prior to neoliberalism, somebody who had a lot of money, who was just trying to speculate and make money off of currency differentials, they couldn't move their dollars or their bahts around the world so easily. But under the conditions of neoliberalism, banks in the United States and around the world have been deregulated. And what they did was they created a whole bunch of financial products like derivatives, right? And these derivatives are basically selling portions of debt of many mortgages, right? And they're just basically making money off of changing interest rates or changing currency rates. That is where the majority of wealth is coming from right now in this neoliberal global economy, okay? And it's rent seeking because if I make money because today I bought the peso cheap and tomorrow I'm selling the Mexican peso expensive, yeah, I'll make some money in a quick minute, but there's no benefit to society, right? There's no jobs created, no education provided. It's just, it's a financier economy. And he's saying this is part of the problem, okay? So yes, rent seeking. Very good. All right, so what are, we were reviewing the myths of trickle-down economy. Stiglitz argues that America is no longer the land of opportunity for all. What does he mean by that? And how does this relate to inequality in education, other sectors?
I would say that it has to do with the fact that people who immigrate to the United States, it's like really hard for them to just like start up like a business and like make it like as huge as it could have been like back in the day. That sort of chasing the American dream doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, good. Other examples? The idea that the US is a land of opportunity and that everyone has an equal chance to make it in this country. He's saying that the level of inequality that defines the US today has actually undermined our own vision of ourselves and our identity as Americans and what we think America should be about. Give me another example with education. So Stiglitz makes a big argument that you students are getting screwed over seriously because we have not had the federal government and the state government investing as much money to bring tuition down, right? If the state's not paying tuition, you're paying tuition, right? And what's happened with student debt in the United States under the conditions of neoliberalism? I keep working with the way forward, the last lecture that we had, and this I'm sort of putting these nuggets of information because I told you I've written the exam here. I ask you in the exam about student debt and what's happened with student debt, because this is one of the big problems that Stiglitz sees, is that in the United States, student debt has gone up 170% just since 2006. Okay, student debt, $1.3 trillion in 2016. Now, 1 in 5 households in the US owes student loans on debt and has student debt of about $30,000 per household. That's up from $9,000 just a decade ago. So not only are more people in debt, students, but the amount of debt that students are having to take on has tripled, quadrupled. And why is this bad for America? How does this relate to this argument where he says this is no longer the land of opportunity?
You start off at such a bad place when you come out of college. How do you build yourself up when you're already like so down, you're like negative money? And you have to it starts accruing interest, so you have to start paying it back pretty much right away, or else you're really in a bad place. So it kind of just sets us up for a lifetime of paying off this debt with the interest and everything.
It also like sets up a cycle of inequality because rich people are able to afford higher education, so then their kids can like not be crippled by debt for the rest of their lives and then can pursue jobs with their education that are higher paying, where at the same time people who are in poverty don't have the luxury to get education sometimes, and then they're not able to get as high paying jobs.
Right, and then what happens collectively as a society is that we are not making the best use of our talent and intellect when we're not allowing people to live up to their full potential. And who knows what's going to happen in this COVID moment, folks. This is certainly going to be another huge global economic recession. But even before COVID, I think many people are choosing not to go to college because they're scared to take on that debt that they know as teachers or others, so unless they're one of these superstar salaries in finance, that they may not ever be able to pay that debt off, right? And so again, we're sort of undermining our collective potential. So this is underfunding education, and the student debt system is a big issue for Stiglitz. And he makes the point that at the same time, Fortune 500 companies can declare bankruptcy and discharge their debt. Student debt is the only type of debt that can't be discharged through bankruptcy. So even if you're saddled with it, as you said, for your whole life. And he says this is part of how banking needs to be reformed. That if Goldman Sachs can get a multi-billion-dollar bailout, then why aren't our students getting the same type of support, right? Okay, so back to, we've already started getting to the question of what Stiglitz argues is the solution. So let's talk about his solution. And I'm on the lecture notes from The Way Forward. Number one is curbing excesses at the top, right? He says that for one, we have to make it difficult for banks to engage in predatory lending and abusive credit practices. And by abusive credit practices, the same mechanism of debt that got third world countries in trouble also gets many individuals in trouble. The idea that banks can charge these huge interest rates and huge fees, $5 every time you use an ATM at a different bank. He says this is just a way in which average Americans are getting taken advantage by the banking sector in the United States. What about offshore banking? We've talked about this before, but remind me, what percentage of the entire world's wealth, if you were to take all of the money in the world and cut it into 10 slices, one of those slices is where?
Offshore.
Offshore. People who are so rich that they are hiding their millions of dollars in offshore banking centers to avoid taxation in their nation states where they have citizenship or their companies are headquartered. Okay. So the financial sector needs reform, according to Stiglitz. Okay. And I'm walking you through this here because, as I said, this is where I'm headed with the big essay question. I'm also able to hit on a lot of the multiple choice. Okay, he also says, number two, we need stronger and more effectively enforced competition laws. Dominant firms have tools to suppress competition. This happens in the form of pharmaceutical manufacturing, right? In many European countries, the government has negotiated prices for needed medicines. In the United States, we don't have that. I think the EpiPen was sort of a recent example of that in the news that caught some attention. Do you all remember that with the EpiPens? Where the price basically skyrocketed from being something somewhat affordable, 40, 50 bucks a pen, to like $500 a pen. And this really illustrated how these powerful pharmaceutical companies can basically set the price they want. And he says that this is bad. We have to break up those monopolies, or the government has to step in to renegotiate prices. Improve corporate governance to limit the power of CEOs. Remember that in Stiglitz's book and in the video that we watched, he talks about the fact that the 0.001% has captured so much of the wealth in the United States. And, you know, really, we're talking about hundreds of people. We're not talking about thousands or millions of people. And I'm sort of looking at this graph here of wealth distribution in the United States. And the very bottom illustrates that red line. 20% of the population has about 85% of wealth in this country. And the top 1% has 35–40% of the wealth. So he says we've got to curb these superstar salaries. This is rent seeking. These people do not make $150 million a year. They take $150 million from the company. And the shareholders of companies need to have a voice in how CEOs get paid, how those financial rewards work, okay? So some of the other things that Stiglitz talks about is tax reform. Give me the idea, what is he saying that we need to impose a progressive tax system in the United States? What does that mean?
Wealthy people and wealthy companies need to pay a higher tax. I think it said that they pay around 15%, while average Americans pay around 30%.
Right. So some of the hedge fund managers, the people who were splicing and dicing these mortgage debts and getting us into all of this trouble, because of lobbying and the power of their lobby, right, which is also rent seeking, lobbying and politicking to get officials, public officials, to reduce their corporate tax rates, to reduce their personal income tax rates. That's an example of rent seeking. He says, isn't it ridiculous that the wealthiest people in our country often pay the smallest percentage of their total wealth? And that is, you know, this is backed by the theory of trickle-down economics. To trickle-down economics, people say, oh, well, look, you know, we need to tax 15% to the top 0.001% because say if they save money, it's gonna trickle down to the rest of us. But that's not true. Why do we need taxes to pay for programs? What sort of programs could we use increased taxes to pay for?
Education.
Right. Going back to where does that money for tuition come from, right? So that, you know, he's arguing that these are all interrelated. And, you know, of course, the sort of government giveaways, he argues, is part of the increased competition and remaking the economy, so that if the banks give out risky loans and they fail, then let them fail, right? And no bank should be too big that it can't fail. At that point, Lehman Brothers or Morgan Stanley or Citibank have monopolized the banking sector. He also says that we need to, number 4, help the rest. He argues that we need to improve access to education. We've talked about that. And also, what about a savings program? Do you remember what Stiglitz said about helping Americans save? What are some of the ways he suggested increasing wealth accumulation among the working class? Does anybody remember this?
In my notes, I have that savings matching programs expand first-time homeowner programs.
Yes, those were the 2 examples that I remember as well. A savings matching program. What might this look like?
A program in which your savings amount is matched as you continually save money.
Yeah, and it could be, you know, it could be incentives to help people save. For example, if you save X amount of dollars in your IRA, your retirement account, the federal government matches that. Or even for sort of struggling young people, to create a savings matching program that would incentivize people to live within their means, because that's been a big problem in America, that people often live beyond their means. But you know, a savings matching program sounds pretty crazy to me when you consider that people are taking out $30,000 debt to pay for education, right? It presumes that people have enough to save. So, but the idea is good. And certainly, you know, he's arguing for expanding first-time home buyer programs, because accumulation of wealth in people's homes is traditionally a way that the middle class has grown here in this country. So he's saying that that's another important way the government can help address inequality, is helping people accumulate wealth either through personal savings, through retirement, or home ownership. And then, you know, this is a concept that's probably quite controversial even among our class. I'm sure not everyone agrees with this, but Stiglitz is making an argument about healthcare. What is his argument?
Healthcare for all.
Healthcare for all, right? And why is he arguing that this is so important?
Americans spend a lot of money on healthcare, so a lot of people aren't actually getting any healthcare. So we have a lot of uninsured Americans all over. A lot of people don't buy healthcare because it's just too expensive.
How does that work for you students? How did you get healthcare through the university?
I'm on my parents' healthcare, I think.
I think most people are in that boat.
I don't have healthcare.
Some people don't have health care. And what you're getting at, I'm really sorry to hear that. And, you know, it's really, there's kind of a difficulty when the government provides health care, in the case of national health care programs, your health care isn't dependent on you having a job that provides health insurance, right? And so with America, when people are in between jobs or people have crappy jobs, which most of us have had, I luckily have health insurance, but I've been working since I was 15. I worked in the sandwich shop, the movie theater. None of those jobs provided health care because they were all part-time. And some people are, you know, pulling together a couple of part-time jobs. Why is it bad that we don't have health care for all? And it doesn't have to be a national health care program. It could be something similar to Obamacare, or sort of like a, you know, a private state managed insurance. It doesn't have to be national health. But what is the problem here with the health care? I think Emily made a really good point that oftentimes when people don't have insurance, they end up waiting to the last minute on going to the emergency room when they could have had preventative care, or people who are destitute, who don't have health insurance, actually go to the emergency room when they get sick. And that's the most expensive place to get your health care provided, right? So, but the other problem has to do with money. I mean, most people are broke in this country because they declare bankruptcy after losing a job or a medical emergency, right? Many Americans lose all of their wealth and all of their savings if they're not insured and they get sick. And so this creates a lot of inequality. So a big problem has to do with medical bankruptcy. And I know people who have gone through this, right? Who are in between jobs, or they don't have health insurance and they have a major health issue that impacts them and their family, and it can wipe out the wealth of an entire household, okay? So I really am encouraging you, as I suggested when I gave you your essay, that when I asked you to say, okay, do you agree? I'm going to ask you to talk about 3 of all of these different ideas that Stiglitz has put on the table, whether it's curbing the salaries of the CEOs, whether it's going after offshore banking, whether it's reforming bankruptcy laws that protect companies and not students, whether it's imposing a progressive tax system, investing in education, both K through 12 and preschool. He talks about preschool too, as well as higher education. I want you to talk about 3 of these ideas in your essay. And I asked you, do you agree with these policy prescriptions? Why or why not? So if you think that one of these ideas is completely off base, I want you to share that with me in your essay, okay? You know, the national health argument is really controversial here in America. And if you don't agree with Stiglitz on that, that's fine. I encourage you, I want you to bring your arguments, but back it with evidence, right? Simply calling it communism or something like that is not an intelligent argument. There are plenty of arguments to be made in defense of private health care in this country. So that's what we're looking at for the big 20-pointer, okay? Let me read that for you one more time, all right? What is the neoliberal theory of trickle-down economics, and why does Joseph Stiglitz argue that it is a myth? What policies does Stiglitz identify to reduce economic inequality in the United States? Name 3. Do you agree with these policy prescriptions? Why or why not? Okay? So that pretty much is what your essay question is going to look like on the 13th. Any questions on that? Okay, so now that we've gone over, you know, a big chunk of the exam, the part that you'll really have to be prepared for and have done some thinking about so that you can answer the exam in time. Let's move back to the other terms and questions, okay? So go back to your review sheet And I want you to flag for me any of these terms that you want defined. Is anybody there? I see that you're all there. Okay, come on. I know maybe you just need a few minutes since I just posted this to look it over. So I'll give you a few more minutes to look and think. When you have one of these terms that you want to talk about, let me know.
Kermit Roosevelt.
Yes, who was Kermit Roosevelt? Who knows the answer?
He was in charge of leading the 1953 Iranian coup.
Yes, which was also called Operation Ajax, right? So Kermit Roosevelt was the US official who led the CIA coup in Iran called Operation Ajax. Good. What else? What is the name of the prime minister of Iran that was ousted by the CIA-backed coup?
Mossadegh.
Mossadegh, Mohammad Mossadegh, yes, most definitely. What about the dictator of Syria that used chemical weapons on his own people in the Syrian war?
Al-Assad.
Yes, Bashar al-Assad is the name of that dictator. What about the politics of mobility? This is a theoretical term that we use in geography. Oh, I'm seeing a question here. Yes, Elias, I'll get there with the curves in just a minute. But the question that I just asked was the politics of mobility. This is something that you probably wouldn't be able to look up online easily.
The politics of mobility. Oh, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
The politics of mobility talks about the inability of some people to move around freely versus the ability of other people to move around as they please.
Yes, good. Emily, what were you going to say?
Basically the exact same thing.
Yeah, I always think about the policies and power relations that determine who and what can move and what and who are stuck in place, okay? So yes, it is about the policies, the international policies, the global policies that shape international movement, but it's also about power relations, okay? Not just policies, codified law. So one example that we have looked at earlier in this class, or maybe we haven't looked at as much as we could have, is the North American Free Trade Agreement, okay? The North American Free Trade Agreement was passed in 1994. It epitomizes neoliberal policy, and it was under attack by President Trump, who rightly argued that NAFTA was not a good deal. And NAFTA was all about creating free trade between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And what's so interesting is that at the same time, the neoliberal policy of NAFTA allows for foreign direct investment by the US and Mexico. It streamlined trade across the US southern border, allowing tomatoes and avocados and clothes to enter the United States from Mexico quicker with reduced tariffs and quotas. At the same time that NAFTA allowed for the movement of money and the movement of commodities, in 1994, Operation Gatekeeper on the southern border begins building fences and borders, securitizing, militarizing the southern border of the United States. So talk about the politics of mobility. Here we have, under the conditions of neoliberalism, free trade, foreign direct investment, global economic integration, at the same time that money and things can move easier across the southern border. Walls and fences are being built, making it more difficult for people to move. Okay, so what can move, under what conditions, and who has the power to determine all of that? Okay, so that's the politics of mobility. We also saw the politics of mobility in relationship to the Syrian refugees. Do you remember that convoluted route that the Syrian refugees had to take to get to Europe when we watched that video? Where did they go on their trip? Do you remember? They first take a plane to Algeria and then a bus to Libya. And basically this reflects the power of the Syrian passport, or the lack of power of the Syrian passport. You know, most Americans can travel the world without having to go through the lengthy and expensive process of applying for a visa, with the exception of a few countries that we do not have diplomatic relations with. Now, on the other hand, if you're a person from a third world country, for you to be able to travel to Europe, you have to give a long, exhaustive account of your life. Remember, we also saw this in the film Life in Debt, when we were looking at how people from Jamaica coming to the US have to go through quite an ordeal to even get permission to come to our country. But yes, many Americans go to Jamaica without thinking twice about their ability to do so. Okay, so the politics of mobility. I want to catch up with tax havens. Tax havens is the same thing as those offshore banking centers. The Cayman Islands is the perfect example, where 10% of total global GDP, global wealth, is hidden to protect those incomes from being taxed. Okay, so that is, yes, and 10% of the world's wealth in tax havens. Are the tax havens the offshore accounts? They most certainly are. Okay, so the Kurds, who are the Kurds?
They're a faction of northern Syria, stuck between, or pinned down between Turkey and the al-Assad government. Mainly they fought against, or are still fighting against, ISIL and Al-Qaeda. But they are also, it's very complicated, but they're also attacked by Turkey and killed by Turkish forces, and supported by the US later on. Actually, Donald Trump withdrew support for a certain amount of time, which led to a lot of them being killed by Turkey.
Yeah, so the it's pretty interesting. The Kurds, and very sad, the Kurds are an ethnic minority and considered precisely one of these nations that doesn't have a state. They consider themselves an ethnic people, their own sort of identity, and 98% of them are Muslim, and they're both Sunni and Shia. But they consider themselves to be distinctly unique in terms of their ethnic identity. And they have long been fighting for the elusive dream of a nation state, a state that would be their own rather than being an ethnic minority in another state. And the Kurds have been fighting for a nation state and at least some level of autonomy within the countries that they reside in. which includes Syria, the northern part of Syria, and largely in Turkey. And the Turkish government has long put down those independence and autonomy efforts, okay? And yeah, the idea was that in the complex proxy war that is Syria, that the Kurds have taken advantage or seized the moment of turmoil and political uncertainty to advance their claims for independence and autonomy. And in doing so, they've been competing for territory against ISIL, who also is an organization that saw the power vacuum and the turmoil in Syria as an opportunity to create their own state, which they call the caliphate, right? And ISIS and ISIL are pretty much the same. I think the correct term is ISIL, but many times people use the term ISIS. And what does the term ISIL stand for? It's on the review sheet.
Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant.
Yeah, the Levant.
Levant.
And yeah, the ISIS stands for Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The Levant is a larger geographic area that includes Syria, but it also includes parts of Jordan and other surrounding areas. So it's just ISIL is their vision, their territorial vision is larger than Iraq and Syria. But what's quite interesting, what we have learned and what I'm learning about, because I'm not, I don't do research on this part of the world, what I find is just so fascinating is the idea that ISIS, ISIL, along with the Kurds, have been using this Syrian crisis to articulate and push forward their territorial claims. And one of the main reasons that the US got involved in all of this was to fight ISIL, not necessarily al-Assad, right? Yes. Let me think a little bit more. I'm not going to ask you a whole bunch of details about the Syrian war. I know that it's very, very confusing. But tell me, how did the whole Syrian war get started? This I am asking on the exam. What did it start with? It has to do with the Arab Spring.
Started with the Arab Spring in 2011. Teenagers took to the street and started painting revolutionary slogans in Syria, and then security forces fired on them. And then protesters took up arms to fight against the al-Assad regime. And then just a civil war broke out, and it escalated into war crimes like the use of chemical weapons by multiple parties, not just al-Assad, murder, torture, rape.
Yeah.
And
so it does.
It kept
it has
escalating.
Its origins, yeah, as you're saying, Mario, it has its origins in peaceful protesters inspired by the Arab Spring in Egypt and Tunisia, who were protesting the al-Assad dictatorship, and basically he fired on peaceful protesters, and things unraveled from there. And what is the name of the city where the Syrian Free Army, who was fighting al-Assad, where did they have their stronghold? And what was the name of the city where a lot of these human rights abuses took place? Yeah, Ethan got it right. Aleppo. Okay, Aleppo. Okay, what else? Other folks, I'm keeping an eye here on chat. So if you aren't able in a position to speak up and ask a question, you can also type a question in the sidebar for me there. I'm just sort of looking over my other questions, folks. One thing that we probably could talk a little bit more about is the rise of the right in Europe. The rise of the populist right, okay? So one of the arguments that we're making is that, and that's the lecture, Us versus Them. I wish if we were in class, we could talk a little bit more about this, but several folks, including myself, make the argument that the rise of the populist right, the nationalist right in Europe is a product of both neoliberal economic policies, which have hurt the 99% and benefited the 1%, but it's also the combination of the Syrian refugee crisis, right? Could somebody tell us a little bit about how the hardship of neoliberalism in Europe, in Britain, for example, combines, and the EU, combines with the flows of Syrian refugees to produce the rise of the right in Europe?
Well, the displacement of large amounts of people and relocation into Western European countries created a lot of xenophobia, which escalated into nativism.
Yes, what's nativism?
It is the belief that, oh shoot, I forgot, sorry. Lost my thought.
Policy, no, you're right. The policy of protecting the interests of native-born or established inhabitants against immigrants. So,
Yeah.
you know, xenophobia can mean a lot of things. It can be anti-Kurdish xenophobia. It can be anti-Islamic xenophobia. And nativism is a type of xenophobia. Basically, the line between us and them is the people that are already here versus those who have yet to come. Not necessarily, but oftentimes related to religion. Yes, so nativism is the policy of protecting the interests of the native-born or established inhabitants against those of immigrants. And yeah, what we're getting at here is that oftentimes economic uncertainty creates cultural anxiety, that you couldn't have just one or the other to produce the rise of the right in Europe. It had to be the economic catastrophe of neoliberalism, and specifically the 2008 global recession. And what happened in Europe following the global recession was that there was a debt crisis, particularly coming out of Greece. Greece was particularly hit hard by the 2008 recession. Greece is in poor shape. A lot of people who are members of the European Union who were suffering themselves after decades of neoliberal reforms. Remember that neoliberalism has its birthplace in the UK with Margaret Thatcher, right? I mean, neoliberalism emanates from the UK and the United States, the Washington Consensus. So Brits haven't been doing well. They are a little bit more protected than folks here in America, but by and large, the same inequality, but not to the extreme in America. Income inequality has increased in the UK. And at the same time that people feel like they're not getting ahead, things are getting more expensive, and they're seeing the fat cats walk away with all the money, then comes in a huge flow of refugees. This provides the disastrous combination of economic hardship plus cultural anxiety, creates the populism, the nationalism that's on the rise in Europe today, okay? So we want to be thinking about how the economic hardship in Europe combines with the Syrian refugee crisis to create populist right-leaning movements. And Stiglitz argues that Bernie Sanders is also a product of the populism and the anger following neoliberalism, right? The whole critique of the 1%, that's a populist message. So you might not have thought about Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders sharing a whole lot in common, but indeed, and I agree that they're both products of the backlash, the anger towards neoliberalism, right? Bernie is blaming Wall Street, and the Trump administration is pointing the finger at free trade, at immigrants, at foreign countries, etc. Okay. Okay, so we're wrapping up here, folks. I really appreciate all of your time. I think that you're going to do just great. I've given you a great heads up in terms of what's coming your way. Are there any other last minute questions that people have about terms or the structure of the exam? Okay, I guess not. I've really enjoyed having you in class. I wish that we had been together the whole semester, but I hope to see some of you in political geography in the near future. And I'll be available via email this week, and we'll also be holding office hours on Thursday as regularly scheduled if you want to follow up with some more questions then, okay? All right, everyone, take care. Thanks for joining me. Wishing you all well.